he would be world known, that we would be here in this great service and with me talking about him and of him being held the rope for by these men whose names we still do not know. Their names are not mentioned in the Bible, but they held on the rope. They didn't know that he would go to Jerusalem next and be a great power for God. They didn't know he would travel the Mediterranean area and plant the gospel, that he'd win more souls, establish more churches, touch more lives. They didn't know he was just a new person coming into town, winning souls. And they held the rope for him, not knowing how great a man they had on the ends of the rope. Had you ever thought about it? The person you're praying for may not be very much. They may not seem to be people of stature, but you never know how great a man, how great a woman they may turn out to be. I think of the great saints of the ages, of the other apostles, Peter, James, and John, that people held the rope for. They didn't know how great a man they had on the end of their rope. They didn't know that someday Paul would end his life martyr, that the Roman king, emperor, would put him to death. They didn't know that he had maybe 30 years ahead his life to be saved, and that they would be responsible for his life being saved. They didn't know he would be the great Apostle Paul. They didn't know he'd write half of our New Testament. They didn't know his heart would burst for the souls of men. They just knew that they were to hold the rope for the Apostle Paul. I asked the question, what if they had dropped the rope? What if they turned a corner and there was a group of men watching? What if they had turned Paul loose and turned and fled for their lives? What if they had let him loose to root hog or die, to live or perish? What if they had let the Apostle Paul go? No, they wouldn't do that. Their names would never be called in the Bible, never be mentioned. They held the rope at night at great risk and danger to themselves. They refused to turn loose of the rope. They knew they were the only ones God had holding that rope. They didn't know, however, how great a man they were holding on the rope. We really don't know much about our fellow man. We don't know what's in their hearts. My mother held the rope for me when I was gone from home, and she really prayed me home. Mama didn't know. Well, I suppose she did know to a certain extent how my life would turn out. That someday I would take the healing power of Jesus to my generation. That I would hear his voice saying to me, "You're to build me a university based on my authority and the Holy Spirit." They didn't know that I'd pay down on this ground across the street with very little money in my possession. They didn't know I'd walk the grounds, pray, calling on God, telling him I didn't have any money. I didn't know how to build a university. I didn't know what to do in building a university from the ground up. People told me I couldn't do it, but there were some people holding the rope for me. I think about those days. I think about the days when I would come down on the ground with no buildings, no faculty, no students, just bare ground, 180